Then we got to another roadblock gate. This time I had Alex get out and let the gate. After that final checkpoint, we were in the village. It was a surreal feeling. After all the years of hearing about this place, we were finally there. It looked like being in the Upside Down from Stranger Things. It was like a small neighborhood, but it just looked wrong. You could see that it was decaying. I pulled the car in front of the church. We all got out and quietly started to explore the area. The first thing I noticed was that there were no cameras anywhere that I could see. That made me feel a little better that maybe we wouldn't get caught. We went to the church first, and it was creepy. There was graffiti everywhere. I looked for the door my brother mentioned when I was a kid, and it was no surprise that there was no trapdoor. After exploring the church, we went and looked at some of the houses. It was so creepy. It was legitimate housing. It just looked completely abandoned. Some of the housing units looked like they'd been hit by a hurricane, while others were still intact. The housing that was intact was more creepy than messed up units. Our friend Scott was with us, and the entire time he was freaking out. He kept claiming that someone was there. Scott was always afraid of something. We kept telling him that it was just because of the nature of what we were doing, that his imagination was probably playing tricks on him. While in one of the houses, we all stopped abruptly because there was an unnatural sound. What I mean is that it didn't sound like a typical noise a house makes. I asked my friends if they had heard it, and they all had. It sounded like wood creaking, like the sound it would make if someone were walking on the wood. Instead of continuing to listen, Alex shouted, asking if anyone was there, and the noise stopped. We all stood in that house for a minute, trying to talk about what we had just heard. I truly didn't know. Alex and Nick were sure that it was just an old abandoned house making noises, not Scott. He was sure that we weren't alone. Either way, I told the group I wanted to leave. I had such an uneasy feeling being there, and I just wanted to go home. I could tell Alex and Nick wanted to stay. Since I drove, I told them that we were leaving. While we were heading to the front door, Scott jumped back suddenly. He quietly pointed to one of the windows on the side of the house. 3 shadows can be seen moving on the outside of the house that was next door. We all became dead silent. Those were clearly the shadows of heads that were moving just outside the window. As quietly as I could, I stepped over to the window and looked outside. I could see the shadows move just out of sight into the backyard of the house we were inside. I whispered as quietly as I could that we needed to make a run for the car. Everyone nodded. Without thinking, we all just sprinted right out the door and in the direction of my car. As the car was in sight, Scott, who was in front of us, screamed at the top of his lungs. We all looked, and standing next to the back seat of my car was a tall woman with a disgusting old black dress on. She had the back door open. It looked like she was about to get into the vehicle because one leg was already halfway into the back seat. When she heard Scott scream, she let go of the door and ran inside the church. We continued running towards the car. When we got there, I looked in the back seat, and thankfully, nobody was back there. We got into the car and drove off as fast as we could. I remember going so fast that I lost control on the dirt and almost crashed the car. That night, we shared stories about who we think we encountered. The most obvious answer is that those people were likely homeless in some capacity and using this abandoned facility as a shelter. All of that makes sense, except for why that woman would be trying to get inside my vehicle. It's also terrifying when I think about that night, because we walked around for quite a while and never saw anybody, or even a clue that somebody had been there, not until right before we left. Even though Scott claimed that he heard something weird, I still think that was just his imagination at that time. Years later, I started telling my girlfriend the story. She said we should look it up and see if it's still there. That's when I realized that it had been torn down in 2014. It's wild that there's so much more information on it now. Growing up, I constantly tried looking stuff up about that place. There was nothing. Because of that, it added more to the mysterious lore of the abandoned village. I'm just happy we left when we did. That Scott screamed when he saw the tall woman. If we had been 10 seconds later running to the car, who knows how this night could have ended. first started dating, we were reckless. Not in a way that harmed anyone directly, but we did some things that I would never do now. Things of questionable legality, in other words. For example, we would explore abandoned buildings and houses trying to find proof of ghosts. I never bought into any of that stuff. I was more of her deal, and I just went along with it because I liked the girl. Out of all the houses and buildings we explored, only one time was I left at a loss for words. I couldn't explain then what I saw, and I don't think I can explain now what I saw either. It was an extremely dark night outside, one of those cloudy nights that just makes everything feel so much darker. She had found this house that was not near anything. It was an old house that barely looked like it was standing. I was always sketched out to go inside these houses, not because I was scared of ghosts. I was sketched out to go inside because I never knew if these houses were going to collapse when I was inside. This house was in particularly rough shape. I had to kick down the front door, which was boarded up. Inside the door was what I assumed used to be a living room, except it was missing half the floor. In the middle of this room was a giant hole where the floor used to be. We took our flashlights and looked down the hole, and you could see what was left of the basement. I kept telling her that we should probably leave because this place clearly isn't safe. She didn't care. She kept telling me just to wait a minute. That was always her go-to line whenever I wanted to leave. She was sneaking around the house watching for holes, and I just stayed by the front door. I told her I was staying there because I didn't trust the floor. She laughed and called me a coward. A few minutes went by, and my curiosity got the better of me. I made my way into the other room where she was. The room was a mess, junk stacked to the ceiling. She was going through all the stuff, trying to find remnants of the people who lived there. That was part of her routine. I wanted no part of that. She told me to check the upstairs. She must have known I didn't really want to do that, because before I could even respond, she said that the sooner we searched the entire house, the sooner we could leave. Reluctantly, I made my way upstairs. At any moment, I was sure I was going to fall through the floor. There was a room directly to the right at the top of the stairs. I went in there first. It was an old bedroom with a bed still in there. It was kind of depressing. The bed was still made, and on the bottom of the bed was a folded-up bathrobe. It was like somebody just disappeared and left their home as is. I continued looking around the room, and there was just more junk everywhere. A lot of clothes, some old knickknacks that were falling apart, and furniture that looked like it might break if you touch it. There was this weird crawl space in the corner of the room. Sometimes we'd find treasure in these crawl spaces. I went inside, and it was weird. It was filled with a bunch of baby stuff, like unopened boxes of diapers and baby food. But the stuff was old, like really old, and covered in dust and cobwebs. Some of the baby food had clearly been gone through by rodents, not to mention it smelled horrible. Just as I was about to leave, I thought I could hear the sound of creaking. I used my flashlight to look around the entire crawl space. In the corner of the crawl space was another little opening. I couldn't believe I missed it a second ago. I crawled over and looked down the opening. It was a narrow path that looked like it went directly across the length of the house to the other bedroom. The creaking sound was clearly coming from down that way. It was a little too big to crawl down the narrow path, so I left the crawl space and started heading toward the other bedroom from the top of the stairs. The other bedroom was down the hall and to the left. As I got closer, I could still hear the creaking sound. It was getting louder the closer I got to the bedroom. My heart was racing, but not because I was scared. I was completely ready to be jumped by a horde of raccoons. I was just a couple of feet away from the doorway. The sound was clear. I quietly walked through the doorway, and I almost fell over. A woman was sitting in a rocking chair, staring out the window. I didn't say anything at first. The back of the chair was facing me, so I could only see the top of her head and what looked like a long skirt on her legs. Slowly, she just rocked back and forth. I was trying to see the reflection of her face in the window, but it was just too dark to make out any details. I took one step toward the woman, and the floor creaked. Once she heard that noise, she instantly stopped rocking. I started to apologize and told this woman that we didn't know someone lived there. Before I could say anything else, she started to rock again, almost like she was completely unfazed that I was standing there. For some reason, instead of running, I took another step forward and asked if the woman was okay. As I took that step, she stopped walking again, and she stood up slowly. When she was standing in front of the rocking chair, I heard her voice. She didn't say it made this noise. It was like a low hum. Out of nowhere, she quickly turned around to face me. It made me jump, and I turned around and ran. I wish I could describe what I saw, but it happened so fast that I didn't really see any details of her face. All I could tell was that she was old and her skin looked wrinkled. I ran downstairs screaming that we needed to leave. I tried telling my girlfriend that we weren't alone and that somebody still lived there. She just laughed. She was so confident that I was messing with her. I was pleading with her that we needed to leave, that someone was upstairs in the bedroom. Instead of listening to me, she wanted to see for herself. I begged her not to go upstairs, but she didn't listen. I was screaming at this point to please leave with her. She just continued to ignore me. I followed her upstairs and watched her make her way to the bedroom at the end of the hall. When she got to the doorway, I heard her say, "Oh my God." I ran to the end of the hallway just in case, and as I got to the doorway, she just started to laugh. Inside the room was the rocking chair, but no woman. She asked if I was scared of the rocking chair and continued to laugh at me. I told her that there was a woman there just a minute ago, and she just kept laughing at me. She went into the room and looked all around. There was no old woman. I swore to her that I saw an old lady, but she just continued to laugh at me. She walked by me and left the room. As she walked away, she said we could leave. We were both walking towards the stairs, and we both heard it. The creaking sound again. The sound of the rocking chair going back and forth. She looked at me and froze. There was no doubt about it. It was the sound of the chair. She mouthed the words to me, "What is that?" as we both stood at the top of the stairs. She took a few steps toward the bedroom and could hear the woman.
30, where my ammunition?
With her own eyes, the rocking chair with someone sitting on the chair and humming to herself. She didn't engage with her. She just turned and ran, and we both ran out the door after that. She started screaming once we got to the car. She kept asking what the hell we just saw, and I didn't say anything. I wanted to look back at the house as we drove off and look at the window to see.
Come on.
I was too terrified. I truly have no idea what we encountered that night. Maybe I really did have a brush with something paranormal. I know how unlikely that is, but who knows? Maybe that kind of thing really does exist. I suppose it could have easily just been a very old woman who still lived inside a filthy and decomposing house, but I don't fully buy that. I mean, the door was boarded up, and there was a giant hole in the living room. Not exactly ideal living situations. Not long ago, I brought the story up to my wife and asked her if she remembered. She obviously did. We drove to the abandoned house, and it had been torn down. There was no house there. Not even any remnants of a house. I try to replay that night in my head all the time. Try to remember what I can about that woman's face. I told myself that it was just an old woman, but something in my gut tells me that that's not the case. When I was in middle school, my family and I moved to a new house. It was an awesome house to be a teenager in. It was bigger than our last house, and the neighborhood was filled with a lot of kids my age. Just about everything was great about this new place, except for our one neighbor. It was the classic mean old man. We would go outside and play two-hand touch football, and if we even got within a couple of feet of his front yard, he would go crazy. He'd start banging on the window and screaming from inside the house that we need to get off his property, even though we never actually went onto his front yard. As an adult, I understand the feeling of unwanted kids on your property. The difference in this situation is that we were good kids and respected his wishes. That didn't matter. As we'd walk outside, he would instantly start banging on the window and yelling at us to get away from his house. It was like he was watching for us all the time. It was brutal. This went on for about 6 months after moving into the new house. One day, we noticed that he had stopped banging on the window. We didn't hear him or see him. I remember joking that he must have died. Why else would he finally leave us alone? Another month or so later, my friend Joel stayed overnight. We woke up in the morning when it was still dark out. I don't recall the exact time. We heard a bunch of commotion coming from next door, and we could see siren lights shining through the window. We got up and looked out the window, and right at that moment, we saw 2 people bringing out a zipped-up body bag.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
I remember feeling a little messed up by this. I'd seen this thing a million times in movies, but never in real life. I'll never forget that feeling of guilt. We were joking about the guy dying, and he really did pass away. I couldn't stop thinking to myself that he must have died over a month ago, and they just now found him. I didn't know that for sure, but something in my gut told me that was the case. After the old man's death, the house remained empty. Well, not completely empty. I guess the correct answer would be abandoned. All the old man's stuff remained in the house, and the house just lay uninhabited for years. Apparently, the old man did have one son, but he lived in another state and didn't even bother to come back after his father passed away. It's actually sad when you think about it. Over the next few years, I would sometimes stare out my bedroom window and just look inside the abandoned house. This house was directly next door, and from my bedroom window, you could clearly see into the house. It was so creepy, knowing that this guy died somewhere there always gave me the chills. For the next few years, I would always joke around with my friends. I would tell them that the place was haunted. My friend Joel, the one who witnessed the body bag with me, was one of those guys who was always scared. Every time I had people over to the house, I would tell Joel that I had seen the old man's ghost. He would cover his ears and tell me to shut up. Everyone would always laugh. I enjoyed being a troll in high school, especially when I had an audience. One night, Joel had enough of the trolling. He dared me to go inside the abandoned house. I didn't love the idea of breaking into the place, and that's what I told him. Joel started to troll me now, calling me a coward and a few other choice words. I thought about it for a second, and I honestly didn't think it would be that big of a deal if I took a quick stroll through the old guy's house. It had literally been empty for a few years at this point. Nobody would even notice if I broke in. I made my way over to the house. I tried to walk inside, hoping that maybe the door was unlocked. Of course, it wasn't. I tried kicking the door down, but I weighed about 130 pounds at the time, so the door was not budging. Next to the front door was a small window. I tried to pry it open from the outside, but to my surprise, it wasn't locked. It slid open easily.
So that's how I handle it. Alright, I ain't worried about no door.
The first thing I noticed when I entered the house was the smell. It literally smelled like death. I started to gag. I had to put the collar of my shirt over my nose. In addition to the smell, it was creepy in there.
Vete la puta madre, pendejo.
In the living room next to his recliner was a book with a bookmark still in the middle of the book. I made my way to the kitchen, and that's where the smell was the worst. This guy had been dead for a while in the house, like I thought before. I was thinking that he probably died in the kitchen. He had a small table in there, with a sweater on one of the back of the kitchen chairs. In front of that chair was a coffee mug. The stove had dusty pots and pans on the burners. I checked to see if something was in them, but they were empty, except for a lot of dust. I left the kitchen and entered a narrow hallway. The first room to the left was the room I was able to see from my bedroom. I entered the room and looked out the window. All my friends were in the window waving at me. Joel looked shocked that I was still inside. While I was waving back at them, I heard a loud bang come from the other side of the house. It wasn't subtle either. It literally sounded like a person banging into the wall. I stood completely still. I was trying my best to focus my hearing, but there was no follow-up noise. I looked back at my friends, and they looked confused, almost like they didn't know why I was just standing there. I was freaked out now. Just the weirdness of this entire situation had me feeling off. Even though there was still more of the house to explore, I was all done. I quickly made my way to the door, unlocked it, and let myself out. When I got back inside my house, I told my friends about what I saw and how terrible the smell was. We talked about it for a little while, but ultimately, we moved on quickly after that. That night, after we all fell asleep, Joel woke me up. I asked what he wanted, and he told me he couldn't sleep because he kept hearing weird noises from next door. I dismissed him right away and told him to go back to bed. I tried telling him that his mind was playing tricks on him because of what I told him about the noise. He didn't say anything. In that quiet moment, I heard a weird noise. Joel perked up and told me that's the noise he kept hearing every few minutes. I admit, it was weird. It was like 2 loud knocks. I sprang up and looked out the window toward the old man's house. It was dark. I could barely see anything. Joel looked terrified and asked what was standing in the doorway of the old man's room, the room I had been in earlier. It looked like a silhouette of a person. I dismissed it at first, telling Joel it had to be a coat rack or something. Then Joel became erratic. He screamed no way. He swore that he had just seen a silhouette move. His erratic behavior woke up my other friends. They all looked out the window and agreed with Joel. I told them that there was no way a person could be standing there. Obviously, there was some type of shadow or something else that we just couldn't explain. While we were arguing among ourselves, Joel screamed again. This time he didn't say anything, he just pointed. I looked out the window, and now standing directly in front of the old man's window was a figure. Whatever it was, it had moved from the doorway to the window. It was still too dark to make out any details, but because of where he was standing, you could clearly see now that it was a silhouette of a person. We all started to freak out. We had no idea what we were looking at. While I was watching this figure, it started to move. I was able to see it walk back towards the doorway until it completely faded back into the darkness. I continued looking out the window for several more minutes, but nothing happened. I had no explanation for what happened. I remember telling my friends at the time that it must have been just the old guy's son finally coming back to the house. It was the only thing I could do to get my friends to somewhat calm down in that moment. We spent the rest of that night constantly looking out the window every few minutes, but we never saw anything again. It was about a year after that I finally met the old man's son. He showed up with a dumpster and gutted the entire house, and he sold it right after. My dad talked to the guy for a while, and he told my dad that he had a horrible relationship with his father. It took him years to finally get to the house and sell it. To this day, that is still the most terrifying thing that I've ever seen with my own eyes. I'm happy that I had several witnesses with me that night who all saw the same thing as me. I know sometimes our minds can play tricks on us, so it's validating to have other witnesses who saw the same exact thing. My friends and I still try to get together once a year, even though we all live in different states now. Every time we're together, the story comes up again. I have no idea what I saw in that old man's abandoned house that night. I'm sure there's a rational explanation for what we saw, and I just have no idea what it is.
That was fast.
At WeCare, we have been providing award-winning AC and plumbing service for over 20 years. If you have an AC or plumbing issue, call WeCare.
Thank you.
When I was a kid. It's not something I talk about much or even think about really, Whenever I do, it gives me an icky feeling inside. Hard to describe. Maybe writing it down will give me some measure of release or whatever, or who knows. I went to a boarding school out in the suburbs. I was there starting in 8th grade, and I ended up staying through most of high school. I shared a room with this kid named Weston. We weren't close at first, just kind of thrown together like everyone else. But over time, we got used to each other. The room itself was basic, 2 beds, 2 desks, and a tiny shared closet. After a few weeks, I started picking up on some weird stuff about Weston. For starters, he gave me a list of items I wasn't allowed to bring back to the room. Completely out of the blue, too. Like he just walked up to me with a folded piece of paper, as if it were some customary thing to be expected of a roommate. As if that wasn't strange enough, the list itself was even stranger. There were a bunch of random things on it that didn't even remotely make sense. I can't remember all of it, but apparently I wasn't allowed to bring frogs into the room, as if I ever had any intention of doing that. I didn't even know where anyone would even find a frog, let alone why they would bring it into their room. But the strangest thing on the list by far is salt. I don't eat salt, so I couldn't imagine why he'd feel the need to tell me that. What, did he think I just bring a salt shaker to the room for no reason? That was absurd. Plus, it was frowned upon to bring any food items back to your dorm, which added to the mystery. And beyond that, what kind of problem could salt even pose in the first place? As far as I knew, salt allergies weren't a thing, so I couldn't imagine what he was trying to avoid with that one. It was just bizarre, especially because of how serious he was about it. You might be thinking it was his form of a joke, but I'm telling you, this kid did not know what humor was. He also had this habit of muttering to himself, not just occasionally, like full-on whispering under his breath, especially at night when the lights were off. I catch little pieces of it sometimes, like he was talking to someone, but there was never anyone else in the room. It was really freaky at first, especially when he accidentally woke me up while doing it. But like everything else, I eventually got used to it. He also kept this little notebook, which wasn't anything crazy until I realized what was in it. The way he never let anyone see it made me think it was something embarrassing or personal, but I was wrong. I knew for a fact that he kept it buried under his mattress. My curiosity swelled over this time, ultimately getting the better of me. One day when he was out of the room, I felt around under his mattress until I found it. The vast majority of it was empty, but there were a few pages that had writing on them. It took me all of 2 seconds to realize what I was looking at. It was a long list of names, and a bunch was scratched out. I read through it and realized that a bunch of the names were kids I knew from school. I frantically scanned it for my name, and I was horrified to actually find it in there, as one of the last pages. It wasn't crossed out, which I figured was a good thing, but I had no idea what any of it meant. There wasn't anything else in there though, just the names, most of which were not crossed out. I tried deciphering it, but there was nothing special about the list. As I was putting it back, I couldn't help but wonder why someone would be so secretive over something so harmless. Were it not for the way Weston protected that thing with his life, I probably would have brushed it off as a list of people he didn't like at school or something. But for whatever reason, seeing that list gave me this really sick feeling inside, like Weston was more than just a socially awkward kid. For weeks after that, I was extremely paranoid that he's...
I always felt like I was made for healthcare. I have a lot of patience.
Find your field. Find your future.
Let me go. Somehow knew what I had done, and I started worrying that he was going to do something to me. We didn't interact much to begin with, but I could have sworn I caught him glaring at me much more often than he ever had. This unexplainable sense of fear started hanging over me, and I gradually spent more and more time outside my dorm. I had a decent amount of friends, and it got to a point where I was spending more time in my friends' dorms than my own. And one night, something happened that made all my paranoia feel justified. I woke up randomly in the middle of the night. I had no idea what time it was, but it was pitch black outside, and I couldn't see anything. At first, I thought I had woken up to Weston's muttering again, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized the reality was much worse. Weston wasn't muttering. That's because instead, he was literally towering over my bed, just standing there in the dark, smiling. His hands were slightly raised, like he was about to do something, but had frozen mid-motion. I screamed. I couldn't help myself, and I sat up in the bed. Despite my outburst, he didn't stop smiling. He didn't even flinch at my scream. He just kept looking down at me, without even altering his stance. The shock of having been woken up like that was one thing, but the way he didn't even react made it even scarier. When I finally demanded to know what he was doing, he just said I'd been talking in my sleep, like that shell of a response somehow explained everything. Like it was totally normal to be standing over someone's bed at 2 in the morning. I didn't know what to say. I was still pelting in shock. The way he kept smiling, even after explaining himself, discouraged me from asking any more questions. He went back to his bed without another word. I stayed awake the rest of the night, not by choice. The next morning, I tried bringing it up. I felt more comfortable and honestly more safe asking him about it now that there was daylight in the room. But he acted confused, like he genuinely didn't know what I was talking about. Not in an angry way either, more in like an okay man, whatever you say kind of way. Like he thought I was making it up as some kind of joke. I couldn't decide whether he was just a really good liar, or whether he truly didn't remember the incident. I couldn't decide which was worse. After that, my fear only got worse. Not just of Weston. It's hard to explain, but I started being afraid of the room itself, like his presence had infected it somehow. Even when he wasn't there, I felt uncomfortable in my own dorm. Things only got worse. About a week later, I came back to the room one night to find a small garden snake on my bed. I'm not kidding, there was a live snake on my bed. I again screamed and looked over at Weston, who was just sitting there at his desk with this blank expression on his face. He actually apologized this time and said that it was just meant to be a harmless prank, but I didn't take it that way. When I asked where he'd even gotten the snake in the first place, he looked at me all confused and said something I will never forget. He said, "What do you mean? They're everywhere." I didn't know what to say to that. I was worried that if I said the wrong thing, he might actually try to hurt me. I had never seen a single snake on campus, but we were surrounded by woods, so maybe he was right. But what really freaked me out was when he opened this jar on his desk, and the snake just slithered right in, all on its own, like it wanted to be captured. I didn't understand how a wild animal would just do that. The whole thing, from finding the snake to his creepy response, to the way it behaved, was freaky. Freakier than I'm describing it. I didn't report it. My young and naive self just couldn't get over what Weston would do if I got him in trouble. That's the thing you have to remember. I was just so young. I was 13. I wasn't old enough to know how to deal with the situation. The breaking point came from a few nights later. It started with what I thought was a nightmare. I was in sleep paralysis, totally unable to move. And there was this dark mass swirling around the ceiling. It was kind of like a blob and kind of like a cloud. And it was pulsing like it was alive, or at least breathing. It kept shifting and moving, and I could only watch as it started descending toward my bed. Then this claw, or something like a claw, emerged from the mass and started scratching at my bed frame, and then it started reaching for me. But before it could grab me, it suddenly recoiled, like something had burned it or scared it off. And then it went completely crazy. It started flying around the room at its desk, like it was angry or wounded. It knocked a bunch of stuff off our desks and rummaged through our closet, and in one abrupt motion, it flew towards the window and smashed right through it, disappearing into the darkness outside. The second I heard the shot, pointed in the direction of the window, like I had been facing that way the whole time. And all at once, I realized why that was so terrifying. The window was actually shattered. What's worse was that there were shards of glass falling to the floor in real time, like it had just been broken moments ago. The rest of the room looked identical to what the scene in my dream had looked like. It was a perfect one-to-one match. Despite being confident that I was now awake, I still couldn't move. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. I tore my eyes away from the window and realized there were long scratches in my bed frame, in the exact spot that claw in my dream had scraped. The fear didn't go away, but the paralysis did. As soon as I could move again, my first thought was that Weston had done it somehow. I went to his bed, and he was fast asleep. He was even snoring, but I wasn't going to let him fool me again. I started shaking him, knowing he was faking it, but he didn't wake up. I kept shaking him, and the longer he stayed asleep, the more desperately I wished he'd wake up. It was such a nasty feeling. I was both deathly terrified of him, and deathly terrified of what it would mean if he hadn't been behind the whole thing. If my nightmare hadn't been a nightmare. The moment I started thinking about that possibility, I started shaking. I wanted to be able to blame him for what had happened, or at least have some other person to make me feel less lonely and afraid, but he didn't wake up. It was too much for me to handle. I went back to my bed, curled up in a ball, and started crying. I didn't know what else to do. The broken window was real. The ransacked room was real. The scratches in the bed frame were real. A few minutes later, Weston finally woke up. He seemed genuinely shocked at the state of the room. I thought that meant we were in it together. But no. Instead, he accused me of having gone through his stuff, and we got into a screaming match. I couldn't believe he was trying to blame the whole thing on me, and he was the psychotic one. He started hissing at me like a cat, and then he started yelling in a foreign language, one I had never heard before. It was not normal. Normal people don't do that. I felt like he was about to attack me. Things get kind of blurry after that. The RA showed up at our door, probably because of all the noise, and he escorted both of us out. I ended up sleeping in the vacant room that night. When I woke up the next morning, it was freezing. It took me a few seconds to realize why. The window in that room was wide open, even though I definitely remember it being closed. No one else was supposed to be in there. That was the nail in the coffin. My brain was already working on a rational explanation for what had happened the night before, but seeing that open window destroyed it all. One of the RAs told me to go get my things from my old room. When I got there, all of Weston's stuff was already gone. He must have cleared it out earlier that morning. Nobody told me what was going on. The administration just moved me to a different room with a different roommate. When I asked about Weston, they said he was no longer my concern. I never saw him again. Honestly, I don't remember much about the remainder of my time at that school. I think my brain just shut everything down and locked everything out as a last resort or some kind of coping mechanism. I don't think I'll ever know what was wrong with that kid Weston, but I don't care. I've thought of every possible explanation for what happened that night, and none of them make any sense. The window was broken from the inside. Anything that might have smashed it from the outside would have been lying on the floor. And I have trouble convincing myself that it was Weston. Not only
Oh yeah, we told.
I had woken up after the nightmare. I would have seen him rushing back to his bed. Something abnormal happened that night, and it terrifies me to think that I might have witnessed it, that my nightmare hadn't been a nightmare.
This is gonna be fun.
Alright, I see what's going on.
When I was little, my parents would send me to my grandparents' farm in Pennsylvania for 2 weeks every summer. The house sat on 40 acres of mostly woods. We'd come for different weeks because our parents wanted to give our grandparents a break between weeks of August. Dad. The ceiling slanted down on both sides, and there was one